Welcome to Module 1, Unit 2 of Chromafor training course. The title of this module is Managing Basic Technical and Environmental Concepts Toward a Circular Human Resource Management Model, and the title of this unit is Material and Human Circularity. Now let's see together which are the main topics of this lesson. First of all, we will talk about material flows, then consumable and usable materials, about the environmental impacts of using material flows in economic systems and in production systems. Then we will talk about circular thinking in the organizations, then how to obtain human circularity, and finally we will close this lesson with circular workforce and recruitment. Now let's see together the first topic, material flows. When we talk about material flows, we talk about natural resources. They play a key role for the economy and human welfare, since they provide the raw materials, energy, food, water and land, and environmental and social services. And natural resources have to be managed well and used efficiently to promote economic growth, environmental quality and sustainable development. We have also to recall that natural resources are limited in nature. That is why we have to use them in the best way. The way in which they are used has consequences on the rate of exploitation and the productivity of natural resources stocks, the environmental pressures associated with the extraction, processing, use and disposal of materials, international trade and market prices of raw materials and other goods, and the productivity and the competitiveness of the economy. Here you can find an example of how companies should apply to enforce their organization schemes. In the most traditional way, you can see that the driver that guide the companies are cost, flexibility, quality and time. But in a new model, which is close to circular economy, another driver has to be included in the decision-making processes, sustainability. Now, let's see together material flows and the way in which they are analyzed in a company. Here in the slide you can find a picture where it is illustrated a material flow chart. And the way in which we analyze material flow is very important. Material flow analysis is the study of physical flows of natural resources and materials into, through and out a given system, which is the usual economy. It is based on methodology organized accounts in physical units and uses the principle of mass balancing to analyze the relationships between material flows, including energy, human activities, including economic and trade development, and environmental changes. Here in this slide, you can find another example of material flow analysis, referring to a specific company. And this approach is very important to evaluate the efficiency of resources recovery and on the technological level of the company. In particular, it provides a suitable means of investigating the potential for improvement in resource-efficient materials, for example, metals, utilization and management. So the most important way, in particular, is to manage every part of this process, and in particular, scraps, new and old scraps that you can see in the picture. Now, let's move to the other topic, consumable and usable materials. Which is the difference between consumable and usable materials? Let's see together. Consumable are materials that are no longer available for production once they are consumed, while usable materials are the one that can be used several times. So it is very important to identify these two material flows in production processes, because the goal of company is to produce and to deal with the usable materials and to reduce the use of consumable materials. Here you can find an example of materials and energy flows in a foundry. You can see every step of the production processes and the material flows of this production process. For additional information, you can find other didactic materials on the Chromafor website. Here you can find some steps about the flows that characterize the metal sector: molding, melting, cleaning of parts, entire production process. In this way, you can identify consumable and usable material. This is a very crucial point because in this way you can understand the way in which a company should move towards circular economy and which are the best way to transform the production system from a linear to a circular economy approach. In this graph, you can find also the relative weighting of each residue subproduct potential impact from an environmental point of view. And also this representation is very important to understand which are the steps of production process which has more impact on the environment. And so then to identify the solution in order to reduce the environmental impact of different steps of production processes. Now let's see more in detail which are the environmental impacts of the systems. There are many sources of environmental impact when you deal with the production process. For example, raw materials, air emissions, waste and residues, emission to water and water use, chemical use and the risks related to chemical use, energy use, and transport, and other things such as noises and vibration. We know that one of the most important sources of environmental damage is, of course, transport and air emissions, but also production processes generate quite an high impact on the environment. So the goal for each firm has to be to reduce the environmental impact of one of each the driver we talk about in this slide. Now let's talk about circular thinking. Circular thinking is very important in a company because we have also to change the mind, to change the approach in which production processes are organized. In the slide you can find a linear thinking approach. You can see that the scheme is if A then B, if B then C. While in a circular thinking you have to close all the loops. Then if A then B and if B then A. This is a circular thinking. So it is very important to move from linear to circular because we have to reply to several questions. How to sort wastes, how to optimize the processes and systems, how to increase renewable sources. And this comparison is really important to guide the companies to choose the best actions to reduce the impact and to promote circular economy. Now let's move to the other topic. Let's talk about human circularity. We know that employees are indispensable parts of a company according to their controlling, producing, creating, managing and other skills. Thus, it is the biggest factor in the creation, implementation and control of the economic company and of the economic models. And there are, in general, seven principles of circular human resource management. Ecological conception, recycle, and then we have repair, reuse, industrial ecology, functional economy, and second-hand and sharing economy. Let's move to industrial ecology, and for other didactic materials, I recall you to have a look to the website of Chromafor. So, industrial ecology. Industrial ecology means that we have to try to bring together all workers and to bring all workers working in the same environment. This is important because the usage of all workforce to obtain multiple ideas and to deal with a specific problem is a step really important for companies in order to have, for example, sharing working places in order to foster innovation. Cooperation between different workers create innovation and new solutions for companies, also from an environmental point of view. This is why it is important to move from a job description planning to a task-based planning. A company has to establish a workforce and task pool the company has to match tasks with groups and to foster creativity to kept alive when given similar but not identical tasks. So it is important for companies to foster some policies that create motivation and cooperation among workforces. Now let's move to the last topic, circular workforce and recruitment. What is important for a company is in particular the reuse. For example, outdated workers can be inside the facility as wise men. This approach can provide a continuous flow of information, empowering in-facility and strengthen employee and job satisfaction. So it is important that new workers collaborate with the older, let's say, workers in order to share knowledge, to share best practice, and to learning by doing. So this is the end of this lesson. Thank you for your attention. For additional materials, have a look to the website of Chromafor, www.chromafor.eu, and see you to the next unit.